I had just stepped onto my porch with a fresh cup of coffee when someone started hammering on my front door fast, desperate, the kind of knock that doesn't wait for permission. Out here on the quiet edge of Redwood County, that kind of urgency usually means trouble. I swung the door open to find my neighbor, Eddie Palmer, flushed and fuming, clutching his truck keys like they'd personally offended him. "Will," he gasped, "the Pine Ridge HOA finally snapped? They put a spike strip across Redwood Loop. A real one. I drove right over it, 2 tires gone." At first, I honestly thought he was exaggerating, but the moment I drove up the hill and saw it myself, razor-sharp steel teeth stretching across a public road, guarded by some guy in a fake HOA police uniform trying to look official, I felt something cold settle in my chest. They thought they were laying down the law? They had no clue the man pulling up to their little checkpoint was the sheriff. Before we dive into this story, tell me where you're watching from and what time it is there, and if you've ever dealt with a crazy HOA, don't forget to hit subscribe so you won't miss how this ends. When I pulled up to the entrance of Pine Ridge Estates that morning, the whole scene felt like something out of a bad parody of a police show. There, standing with his chest puffed out like a rooster on parade, was Brent Dalton, the self-appointed head of HOA security. The man wore a navy polo with a shiny metal badge that looked like it came from the toy aisle of a Walmart. To his right lay the infamous device, a gleaming metal spike strip drilled into the asphalt of Redwood Loop, a road that absolutely, undeniably, legally belonged to the county. Brent didn't know that yet, or maybe he did, and he simply didn't care. Either way, his posture screamed one thing: he was loving every second of his imaginary authority. I eased my truck to a stop, just short of the spikes, and rolled my window down. Brent sauntered over, twirling a set of keys around his finger like he thought he was a sheriff in an old western. "Morning," he said, trying to deepen his voice. "This road is now subject to HOA traffic control. Approved vehicles only." I stared at him for a long second, biting down the urge to laugh. The man was 38 years old, balding, and usually spent his weekends yelling at squirrels for entering his yard. Now he was pretending to run a checkpoint. "What's this about?" I asked, keeping my voice mild. "New safety measure," he replied, gesturing grandly to the spike strip. "Too many unregistered vehicles getting through. We can't keep the neighborhood secure unless we know who's coming and going. HOA voted on it." I took another slow look at the spikes, sharp, thick, mounted on a retractable motor that looked way too sophisticated for something HOA approved. Someone had spent good money on this contraption. "This is a county-maintained road, Brent," I said, "not private. You can't just block traffic." Brent smirked a smug, oily little smirk. "Actually, Sheriff," he paused, as if the word sheriff were reserved only for him. "Actually, Will, we can. Pine Ridge owns the easement. Our board ruled this strip necessary for the safety of our residents." Easement? The man probably didn't even know what the word meant, and the HOA sure as hell didn't own one here. Before I could reply, an approaching sedan came around the curve behind me. The driver, unaware of the blockade, waved politely and tried to pass beside my truck. Brent didn't even try to warn him. He just clicked a small black remote in his pocket. I heard the metallic click before I heard the sound. Bang, then a second, louder bang. The sedan lurched violently to one side, its front tires instantly deflating into ragged rubber spaghetti. The driver slammed on the brakes and jumped out, staring wide-eyed at the shredded mess under his car. "What the hell?" he shouted. "What is this? What did you do?" Brent didn't even flinch. He held up a clipboard like it was a holy artifact. "Sir, your vehicle is not registered with the Pine Ridge HOA, meaning you are not authorized for entry. You may file an appeal with the board during normal business hours." The man looked like he might explode. "I live here. Space 214. I've lived here 12 years. You just destroyed my tires." Brent shrugged. "Then you should have registered your license plate. HOA protocol." The driver stared at him, stunned into silence. And me, I took a long, deep breath, because at that moment, I realized two things. One, Brent wasn't just overstepping, he was on a full-blown power trip. Two, this whole operation was bigger than Brent's ego. Someone higher up was backing this. "I'm going to need you to open the lane," I told him. Brent crossed his arms. "Not gonna happen. Rules are rules." I stepped out of my truck, not raising my voice, not posturing, not flashing my badge. "Not yet. You're operating a roadblock on county property." I said evenly. You're also causing property damage and endangering the public. That spike strip comes up right now? Brent laughed, an actual, snorting laugh. Oh, Will, you're not in the HOA. Your opinion means absolutely nothing here. That was the moment I knew he was not just ignorant, he was confident. He truly believed the HOA had real jurisdiction, which meant someone had fed him that lie, and that someone was likely Mallory Grant, the Pine Ridge HOA president, a woman who treated her position like the presidency, the Supreme Court, and the Vatican rolled into one. As if summoned by the thought, Mallory marched out of the HOA office across the street, her heels clicking hard against the pavement. She wore that same overly bright smile that never reached her eyes. Will, she declared in a sing-song voice, so glad you stopped by. We're simply improving the safety of our community, nothing to worry about. Your spike strip just ruined that man's car, I said, pointing toward the fuming sedan owner. Unfortunate, she replied, shrugging. But the rules are the rules. Everyone must comply. You don't have the authority to restrict access on a public road, I said. Mallory waved a manicured hand. Actually, we do. Our legal team confirmed. I cut her off gently. Mallory, Pine Ridge does not own Redwood Loop. It's not HOA property. Her smile tightened. We believe otherwise. Believe, not know, not prove, not verify, just believe. That was all I needed to hear. I scanned the area again, and that's when I spotted it. A small, nearly invisible black dome, mounted on top of a nearby street lamp. A camera, HOA run, undoubtedly recording every vehicle, every violation, every moment of this insane power play. Evidence, more importantly, evidence they couldn't deny. Looks like you've got everything under control, I told Mallory, stepping back. She brightened, mistaking my calm for surrender. Wonderful, Brent smirked at me. Smart man, smart man. I had to fight not to laugh in his face. I walked back to my truck, climbed in, and shut the door. But I didn't drive off right away. I just sat there, staring at the spike strip, at Brent's cheap badge, at Mallory's smug little smile. The HOA thought they'd won. They thought they were the law. They thought I was just some quiet neighbor with no authority, no influence, no say. They had absolutely no idea who they were dealing with, and as I turned the key in the ignition and pulled away, one thought settled solidly in my mind. This wasn't just overreach. This was corruption, and corruption was my jurisdiction. By the time I got back to my office at the Redwood County Sheriff's Department, the irritation in my chest had settled into something colder: focus, purpose, the kind of determination that came from years of dealing with petty tyrants who mistook rules for weapons. I set my hat on the edge of my desk, sat down, and pulled up the county property records database. If Pine Ridge Estates truly believed they owned that stretch of road, I wanted to see what paperwork they were hiding behind. I typed in Redwood Loop, hit enter, and waited. It only took a few seconds for the screen to populate, and just like I expected, the truth came up in black and white. Redwood Loop was county maintained, funded by public infrastructure grants, and inspected annually. Pine Ridge Estates had no legal easement, no private claim, not even shared maintenance responsibility. Translation, they owned absolutely none of it. But that wasn't the part that bothered me. It was the note buried at the bottom of the file, something I had seen before. 3 years ago, the Pine Ridge HOA had attempted to petition for private road status, claiming security concerns. The county rejected it immediately, yet here they were, acting like they won. I leaned back in my chair and tapped my fingers against the desk. If Mallory and Brent were confident enough to install spike strips, then either they were profoundly stupid or they believed no one would challenge them. And sadly, I knew from experience that in neighborhoods like Pine Ridge Estates, fear and exhaustion often kept people quiet. HOA boards thrived on silence the way fire thrived on gasoline. Still, I needed more than suspicion. I needed motive. I opened another database complaints filed with the Sheriff's Department over the past year. I filtered the list by Pine Ridge Estates. The screen lit up, 32 reports, 32, and most of them were variations of the same theme: fines, threats, vehicle warnings, parking citations, attempts to tow cars from driveways, letters demanding compliance for rules no one remembered agreeing to. One resident, Mr. Halloran claimed the HOA tried to charge him $400 because the shade of blue on his mailbox did not reflect the community's color palette. Another report detailed how a young couple received a violation for keeping a kayak in their own backyard. But the most damning one came from an elderly widow named Ruth Wright. She had called in, crying, explaining that the HOA threatened foreclosure over non-compliant patio furniture. Foreclosure over a set of plastic lawn chairs she'd had since 1995. I rubbed a hand over my face. This wasn't just overreach. This was an HOA using fear as currency. I clicked the final report and felt my jaw tighten even more. Someone had anonymously claimed the HOA was running a vehicle approval program, charging residents to register their cars or risk being denied entry to their own homes. And then it clicked. The spike strip wasn't just about control. It was about money, a new revenue scheme, a new way to squeeze residents. I needed proof. I stood, grabbed my jacket, and walked out into the hallway. My deputy, Marlene, passed by with a stack of paperwork. "You're heading out again?" she asked. "Yep," I replied. "Investigating a crime scene?" She raised an eyebrow. "Which one? Pine Ridge Estates?" She blinked, then let out a low whistle. "God help you. God helps those who help themselves," I muttered, heading for the door. Outside, the sun was beginning its slow descent, casting long shadows across the parking lot. Perfect darkness would give me cover. I didn't go in uniform. I didn't take a marked vehicle. I used my personal truck, parked 2 blocks away from the spike strip, and slipped down the sidewalk under the settling dusk. The street lamps flickered on. Porch lights around Pine Ridge glowed warm and yellow. Somewhere in the distance, a dog barked. I approached the street lamp that had caught my eye earlier that morning, the one with the tiny black dome tucked beneath the metal bracket. HOA-run cameras were never expensive, and this one was no exception. It wasn't encrypted, wasn't professionally mounted, and more importantly, was pointed straight at the spike strip. I reached into my pocket, pulled out a small, covert camera, no bigger than a USB drive, and clipped it beneath the lamp, facing the road with a perfect angle. The motion sensor would trigger whenever someone approached. I stepped back, blending into the sidewalk as if I were just taking a nighttime stroll. Minutes passed, then half an hour, then... Finally, I heard the sputtering buzz of a small engine approaching. A golf cart rolled into view, headlights dim, tires crunching gravel. Brent Dalton sat behind the wheel, still wearing his HOA police badge, sipping from an oversized travel mug like he was on patrol for the U.S. Marshals. He parked next to the spike strip, climbed out, and looked around as if expecting to catch a fugitive hiding behind a shrub. Satisfied he was alone, he reached into his pocket and pulled out the same remote I'd seen earlier. I recorded everything. Brent pressed the button and the spike strip retracted smoothly into the asphalt. He glanced at a clipboard probably full of license plate numbers, before pressing the button again, forcing the spikes back up. He wasn't inspecting, he wasn't securing the neighborhood, he was targeting. A minute later, he pulled out a second list. Even from my hiding spot, I could see the bold heading, authorized vehicles, paid. The HOA wasn't just enforcing a rule, they were charging residents for vehicle approval, and anyone who didn't pay, their tires got slashed by HOA-approved machinery. I felt my blood pressure rise. Brent finished resetting the spikes, chuckled to himself, an actual cartoon villain chuckle, and hopped back in his golf cart. He drove off humming. I waited until he was out of sight. Then I retrieved the camera from under the street lamp, tucked it into my jacket, and walked calmly back toward my truck. I didn't need to see anything else. I already had what I needed. I had motive, I had intent, I had video evidence, and by sunrise, Pine Ridge Estates was going to find out exactly what it meant to play pretend police on a public road. I drove home with a calm, steady certainty, the kind of feeling I only ever got when I knew justice was already unfolding in my hands. Tomorrow would be messy. There'd be shouting and news vans and a couple of red-faced HOA board members claiming they misunderstood the law. But in the end, truth didn't flinch. By the time I pulled into my driveway and killed the engine, one thought echoed loud and clear. The HOA thought they were the law. Tomorrow, they would learn what real law looked like. Sunrise crept over Redwood County with a pale gold glow, washing across the hills and rooftops of Pine Ridge Estates like a fresh coat of paint. Most mornings, the HOA would be gearing up for another day of nitpicking, rule checking, and sending out violation letters by the dozen. But not today. Today, they were about to meet the real sheriff. I gathered my team just before dawn. 3 deputies, Marlene, Ortiz, and Harper stood around the briefing table while I laid out the plan. As always, they listened with that silent mixture of patience and curiosity they saved for the moments when I came in looking like I hadn't slept because something big was cooking. Pine Ridge Estates installed a spike strip on Redwood Loop, I said. Harper choked on his coffee. A what? A spike strip? I repeated. Metal teeth, rigged, motorized, controlled by a remote. Marlene swore under her breath. Ortiz just blinked. You're kidding. Harper set his cup down. Those things are regulated. They can't. No, I said. They can't. I clicked the covert footage onto the screen. Brent appeared, in all his late-night glory, strutting around the spike strip like a mall cop who just seized the keys to the Pentagon. The deputies watched silently as he lowered the spikes for certain license plates, then raised them for others, all while referencing a paid authorization list. Harper muttered, "Oh, they're done. They're absolutely done." "They will be," I said. "Today," Marlene leaned forward. "Do we have evidence the HOA approved this?" "Oh, I expect they'll deny it," I replied. "But denial doesn't hold up well against recorded proof, resident complaints, and public property law." Ortiz nodded slowly. "So, what's the plan?" "Simple," I said. "We're shutting it down." We rolled out in 3 marked patrol cars. The morning air still held a bite of cold, a reminder that winter wasn't quite finished with us yet. As we approached Pine Ridge, the sun had climbed high enough to illuminate the spike strip from half a mile away. The metal glinted like the scales of some oversized beast lying in wait. Brent was there already, sipping what had to be his 3rd cup of coffee. The man must have believed he was on the front line of national security. I almost felt a twinge of pity for him, knowing what was coming. Almost. Our patrol vehicles came around the bend with lights flashing. Brent's shoulders stiffened. He set down his coffee so quickly it nearly tipped. I stepped out first. "Morning, Brent," I called. He attempted a salute. "Sheriff, Will, this is restricted HOA. Not today," I said. Marlene and Harper flanked me while Ortiz circled behind, approaching the spike strip with a careful eye. Brent cleared his throat. You can't be here unless you're an HOA-approved vehicle." I almost laughed. Instead, I reached into my jacket and pulled out my badge, not the wallet version, not the small one I used for casual stops. The full metal badge, gleaming, unmistakable. "I'm Sheriff William Stockton of Redwood County," I said. "And you are under investigation for illegal road obstruction, property damage, extortion, impersonating a peace officer, and tampering with public infrastructure." The color drained from Brent's face so fast he looked like someone had siphoned the blood right out of him. "No, wait, hang on, this isn't what you think." Ortiz pointed at the spike strip. "It's exactly what we think." I nodded toward Brent. "Remote, pocket, hand it over." He hesitated. Marlene took a single step forward. He handed it over. The moment the remote hit my palm, I felt the tension around us shift. Residents were beginning to gather, men in slippers, women in robes, joggers mid-stride, dog walkers pausing with leashes in hand. Word traveled fast in Pine Ridge, and nothing drew attention like law enforcement rolling in full force. A door slammed across the street, and out marched Mallory Grant. She didn't run. Mallory didn't do anything as undignified as running, but she moved with urgent, purposeful strides. She wore a silk scarf, pearl earrings, and an expression so tight it looked carved from granite. "Sheriff Stockton," she said in a voice dipped in honey but sharpened at the edges. "I'm certain this is just a misunderstanding." "A misunderstanding," I repeated. "Mallory, your HOA installed a trap on a county road. That's a felony." She forced a breathy laugh. "Trap? No, Sheriff. This is a safety device, entirely legal." I held up the remote. "Controlled access to a public road is not legal. Selectively disabling resident vehicles is not legal. Charging for vehicle authorization is definitely not legal." Marlene stepped in. "And impersonating police officers, uniforms, badges, insignias, that's a federal offense." Mallory's facade cracked for just a moment. A flicker, a tiny tremor in her carefully curated poise. "Sheriff," she said, "I assure you this was all approved through proper channels." I raised my eyebrows. "Oh good, then you'll have no problem explaining this." I pressed a button on my tablet. and the footage I'd captured the night before began playing on the screen. Brent lowering the spikes, raising them, checking a list labeled paid, and resetting the trap again. A ripple of gasps rolled through the gathering crowd. Mallory went pale. One resident I recognized, Mrs. Fisher, who'd called us 3 times about HOA harassment, stepped forward and jabbed a finger at Mallory. "You did this. You endangered us. You damaged our cars." "Ma'am," Mallory stammered. "Please, let's all remain calm." "Calm," Mrs. Fisher snapped. "You told us this was for safety. You lied to us." Suddenly the whole crowd erupted. "My tires were slashed last week. You fined me for parking in my own driveway. You tried to tow my truck. You threatened foreclosure over patio furniture." The HOA's greatest weakness wasn't the law. It was the people they'd stepped on for far too long. I looked at Harper. "Cuffs," I said. He stepped forward, grabbed Brent by the wrist, and pulled his arms behind his back. The clink of metal echoed across the street. Mallory flinched. "Sheriff, surely we can. Surely there must be a way to settle this without accountability," I asked. "No, Mallory, there isn't." Ortiz and Marlene approached, each taking position beside me. I continued, my voice calm but carrying across the neighborhood. "Mallory Grant, as president of Pine Ridge Estates HOA, you are being detained pending investigation for fraud, embezzlement, illegal enforcement practices, misuse of HOA funds, and knowingly authorizing unlawful road obstruction." Someone in the crowd shouted, "Lock her up!" Mallory wilted, her confidence draining away like water from a cracked bucket. I didn't know," she stammered weakly. I sighed. "That's the thing, Mallory, you did." We escorted Brent to one patrol car and Mallory to another. Residents filmed everything, their voices rising with the feverish energy of people finally watching justice unfold. A man approached me, middle-aged, tired, wearing an old flannel shirt. He spoke quietly. "Sheriff, thank you. Nobody's listened to us for years." I nodded. "Your complaints did matter. Today proves it." He swallowed hard. "What happens now?" "Now," I said, scanning the gathered crowd, "now we clean up this mess." And Pine Ridge Estates was about to see just how thorough a cleanup could get. The moment Mallory and Brent were secured in the patrol cars, the energy in Pine Ridge shifted from outrage to something else, anticipation. People weren't just angry anymore. They were ready to confront years of pettiness, corruption, threats, and the constant, suffocating pressure of an HOA board that had forgotten what the word community even meant. I could feel the buzz in the air as more residents poured out of their houses, some clutching coffee mugs, others still in pajamas or workout clothes. A few teenage kids, who had probably spent years getting scolded for skateboarding on non-HOA-approved surfaces, stood together with phones raised, filming every second with wide grins. Harper approached me as I surveyed the growing crowd. "Sheriff," he murmured, "this is about to turn into a full accountability circus." "Good," I said. "Let them speak." We needed transparency now more than ever, and Pine Ridge had a lot to say. Before I could address the crowd, a frantic voice pierced through the noise. "Sheriff Stockton." A man came rushing forward, early 40s. Athletic build, glasses, still wearing a running vest like he'd just stepped off the treadmill. He introduced himself breathlessly. "I'm Daniel Perez," he said. "The HOA tried to fine me because my running shoes left excessive footprints on the sidewalk. You have no idea how insane it's been around here." "Oh, I think I'm learning," I replied. But Daniel wasn't done. "There's more, much more. They've been charging us vehicle verification fees for months now. And if we didn't pay, well, you saw what happened." His eyes flicked toward the spike strip. I exhaled slowly, my suspicions confirmed. "You have proof of those charges?" Daniel nodded vigorously. "Emails, notices, duplicate invoices, the whole paper trail? I'll get them." Before he could run back to his house, a woman in her 60s stepped forward, voice trembling but strong. "I'm Ruth Wright," she said. "They threatened to foreclose my home over patio furniture that didn't match their catalog. Furniture my late husband built. They said it ruined the aesthetic harmony. I've never been so humiliated." Her hands shook, but not from fear, rage. I touched her elbow gently. "You're not the one who should be ashamed, ma'am." "We'll fix this." Ruth nodded, tears forming at the corners of her eyes. Behind her, Another resident yelled from the sidewalk. They shut down my son's lemonade stand, said it violated the micro-commerce policy. Someone else chimed in. They measured my grass with a ruler and fined me because it was 1/8 of an inch over the limit. And they fined me for having a non-approved welcome mat, and for drying towels on the balcony. The complaints spilled out like a burst dam, years of pent-up frustration unleashed in a torrent of stories that all led to one truth. Pine Ridge had been living under a miniature dictatorship. Ortiz went to check the spike strip again, documenting it from every angle. Harper supervised the removal of the perimeter cones and fake signage. Residents clustered near the edge of the street, as if afraid the thing might jump up and bite them again. Then someone shouted, "Here comes the news." And sure enough, a van from Channel 12 rolled around the corner, followed by another from a regional station. Word traveled fast in Redwood County, and the sight of 2 patrol cars, a roadside arrest, and a crowd of angry homeowners was the kind of spectacle media crews lived for. A reporter hopped out, adjusting her blazer as she made a beeline toward me. "Sheriff Stockton, can you explain what's happening here?" she asked, microphone outstretched. I didn't hide anything. There was no point now, not when this HOA had done everything it could to hide their misdeeds behind bureaucracy and phony authority. The Pine Ridge HOA installed an unauthorized, dangerous spike strip on a public road, I said clearly. They used it to damage vehicles, extort residents, and enforce illegal restrictions. This was not negligence, it was intentional. Gasps, murmurs, and the soft click of more cameras echoed around us. The reporter angled her mic closer. "Are there criminal charges?" "Yes," I replied. "Multiple, including road obstruction, destruction of property, impersonation of law enforcement, and fraud. Spotlight on Pine Ridge, exactly where it needed to be." Behind me, Mallory sat stiffly in the patrol car, watching the entire scene unfold through the window like her world was being ripped apart. Brent sat in the other car, hands cuffed, eyes darting nervously. A few residents approached the news crews to share their experiences, voices shaking with anger and relief. Finally, after years of being ignored and dismissed, someone was listening. That was when Eddie, who had been quiet up to that point, stepped beside me. His voice was low, gritty with emotion. "Will, I didn't think we'd ever get rid of them. Everyone was too scared. They fined us for everything. My daughter's bike was non-regulation. My grill was a fire hazard. They told me my dog's bark had to be under 70 decibels. I looked at him. "Eddie, you should have come to me sooner." He shrugged. "We didn't think it was your kind of thing. HOA drama, rules and fines. We didn't know it could get this bad." "That's how they work," I said. "They push until someone pushes back." A loud metallic clank snapped everyone's attention. Ortiz had pulled out a heavy-duty bolt cutter. "Sheriff?" he asked. I nodded. Ortiz knelt at the base of the spike strip mechanism and began cutting through the metal housing. Residents crowded closer, cheering as the structure groaned, weakened, and finally broke. Harper wedged a crowbar beneath the bolts, anchoring it to the road. 2 more residents joined in, then 5, then 10. Together, they pried the entire assembly up from the asphalt. It came loose with a shriek of tearing metal. The crowd erupted. People clapped, whistled, hugged, shouted. Some took pictures holding up the broken spike strip like it was a trophy from a victorious hunt. And somehow, in the middle of all this noise and chaos, Mallory's voice rang out from inside the patrol car. "You can't do this. This is HOA property. It's protected under. She faltered as she realized she had no idea what it was. Protected under. Marlene tapped on her window. "Ma'am, please remain calm." Mallory sank back into the seat, utterly defeated. I walked toward Harper as he collected pieces of the dismantled strip. "We'll transport this to evidence," he said. "Good," I replied. "The DA will want every piece." Residents began gathering around me again, thanking me, shaking my hand, telling me how long they'd felt trapped. It was overwhelming, but in a good way, like opening a window after years of stale air. Then one man, wearing a faded baseball cap, asked the question they were all thinking. "Sheriff, what's going to happen to Pine Ridge now?" I took a deep breath. "That's up to all of you. But today marks the end of how things used to be. They deserved that much. They deserved better." A voice from behind the crowd shouted. "We're calling an emergency meeting tonight." "Good," another replied. "We're voting them out?" I second that, and dissolved the whole damn board. The excitement reached a fever pitch. Voices rose, faces lit with hope. For the first time in a long time, Pine Ridge Estates felt like a community again. Not a dictatorship, a neighborhood. A place where people lived not under rulers but together. I stepped back, watching them reclaim their street, their voices, and their dignity. They didn't just remove a spike strip, they removed a regime. And the day wasn't over yet. The meeting that night was supposed to start at 7 o'clock sharp, but I swear, half the neighborhood was already packed into the Pine Ridge clubhouse by 6:15. People stood shoulder to shoulder, crowding the aisles, leaning against walls, pressing in at the windows. Even the parking lot had clusters of neighbors murmuring angrily, waiting for the fireworks to begin. You could feel the tension before you even walked through the door. It was the kind of electric charge that comes right before a thunderstorm. Everyone knew something big was about to happen, and no one wanted to miss a second of it. Technically, I didn't need to attend. Law enforcement had already done what we came to do: arrest the offenders, dismantle the illegal obstruction, secure the evidence. But Pine Ridge Estates wasn't finished, and after everything these residents had endured, I wasn't about to let them face the collapse of their HOA without someone there to keep the peace or witness the justice that had been a long time coming. When I stepped inside the clubhouse, conversations hushed, then restarted in a swirl of whispers. Some folks clapped me on the back, thanking me again. Others motioned for me to take a seat. A few just exhaled with relief, as if seeing me meant that tonight's chaos would be channeled into something productive. Instead of erupting into a riot, the HOA board, or what remained of it, sat at the front table. Without Mallory, who was currently in custody, the remaining members looked like a group of students waiting outside the principal's office. Pale, sweaty, overdressed, and underprepared. One man, a thin blonde fellow named Gerard, who had been the HOA treasurer, shuffled papers with trembling hands. A woman beside him dabbed at her forehead with a napkin. They all looked lost without Mallory's overbearing glare to guide them. I almost felt sorry for them. Almost. A loud slam echoed as someone shut the clubhouse door. The chatter died down. Eddie stepped forward, cleared his throat, and addressed the room with a booming voice I didn't know he had. "All right, folks," he said. "Let's get this circus started." A ripple of laughter swept the crowd. "A helpful tension breaker," Eddie continued. "Tonight's meeting is about one thing: taking back our neighborhood. Pine Ridge has been under hostile management for too long, and thanks to Sheriff Stockton, we've finally seen what our HOA has really been up to." People cheered, clapping for several seconds. When the noise settled, Eddie pointed at the board members. "We're giving the remaining officers a chance to explain themselves." Gerard stood, gripping the podium like a lifeline. "Ladies and gentlemen, we had no idea Mallory was doing these things. We were misled. A woman in the front row shouted. "You signed off on every fine she issued. Ender." "That's right," someone else added. "You harassed us for years." Gerard raised both palms, sweating. "We trusted her judgment, and she trusted that you wouldn't question her." Another resident snapped. "That's the problem." The room erupted into overlapping voices, accusations, frustration, bitter recollections of every petty violation letter ever shoved under a door. I stepped forward with my hands up. "All right, everyone, let them talk. Then we'll get to the decisions." They quieted again, though reluctantly. Gerard swallowed hard. "We didn't know about the spike strip. I swear it. Mallory handled the contract privately. She told us it was a temporary traffic calming measure." "Traffic calming?" a man scoffed. "It destroyed my tires. That was never mentioned." Gerard sputtered. "And as for the vehicle approval fees," he paused, looking sick. "We thought the money was being used for neighborhood events." Eddie barked a humorless laugh. "What events? You canceled the 4th of July barbecue and replaced it with a 2-hour lecture on shrub compliance." A wave of groans rippled across the crowd. The woman beside Gerard finally spoke. Her voice was small, shaky. "Mallory told us the budget was strained. She said we needed new revenue." She said the residents agreed. "Nobody agreed," Ruth said, stepping forward. "You people steamrolled us, and when we said no, you threatened us." A chorus of "That's right, exactly," and finally rose behind her. The treasurer's shoulders hunched inward. "We never wanted this. And yet," I said quietly, "here we are." He looked down. "We're sorry." Silence followed, heavy, meaningful. Then Eddie cleared his throat again. "We're done with apologies. It's time for action. He held up a printed ballot for the room to see. This is a vote to dissolve the Pine Ridge Estates Homeowners Association. An explosion of cheers shook the clubhouse. Gerard's eyes widened. Dissolve. Completely? Oh yes, Eddie said. Completely. But you can't. Gerard began. We can, Ruth interrupted. It's in the bylaws. If 75% of homeowners vote to dissolve, the HOA ceases to exist. Murmurs of understanding rippled through the crowd. And guess what? Eddie continued, waving the ballot mid-air. We already have over 60% signed petitions from today alone. Gasps, applause, a few whoops of joy. For the first time all day, the board members looked truly terrified. A man near the back shouted, "Put it to a vote, 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 vote." Others chanted, and so the ballots were passed out, row by row, clipboard by clipboard. People marked their choices with pens, pencils, or whatever they had on hand. While they voted, I watched faces, relief, determination, vindication. Pine Ridge was waking up from a long nightmare, and watching it happen felt like witnessing a small revolution. Within 15 minutes, the ballots were collected. A small committee, not including any board members, counted them at the front table. Every eye in the room burned holes into their backs. After several tense minutes, Daniel, one of the counters, turned around, holding the final tally sheet. "It's unanimous," he said, voice cracking with emotion. 100% in favor. The clubhouse exploded. People hugged, people cheered. Someone blew a party horn they'd been saving for a happier day. One woman even cried openly, wiping tears with the sleeve of her sweatshirt. The Pine Ridge HOA, after years of suffocating rules, intimidation, and financial manipulation, was dead. A weight seemed to lift off the entire neighborhood. Gerard and the others stood frozen, unsure what to do. Without power, without titles, without Mallory to hide behind, they were simply residents just as lost and overwhelmed as everyone else. Eddie moved to the microphone once more. Effective immediately, the HOA is dissolved. All assets will be frozen until the county completes its investigation. Any future management discussions will be conducted by a resident committee. He looked around the room. We're free. Let's not forget how that feels. The room roared with approval. The meeting eventually broke, though the celebration continued in pockets. People clustered in groups, laughing and venting and planning for a better future. Kids ran around the clubhouse like they'd been released from detention. I stepped outside into the cool night air, letting the noise fade behind me. The stars were bright, the neighborhood quiet except for distant shouts of excitement. For the first time since the Spike Strip incident, Pine Ridge felt like a place people wanted to live, not endure. Eddie joined me on the walkway. "You did good today, Will. You all did," I replied. "I just lit the match. You carried the torch," he chuckled. "I still can't believe it. The HOA, gone. Some things need to burn so they can be rebuilt." He gave a slow nod, taking that in. "You sticking around for the after party?" I smirked. "Eddie, it's a Wednesday night in a residential neighborhood. This is the after party." He laughed. "Fair enough. See you tomorrow." As he walked back inside, I took one last look at the clubhouse alive with voices, lights, and hope. Pine Ridge Estates had been through hell. But tonight, they found their way out, and tomorrow, we'd make sure the ashes were swept away for good. The next morning, my day started not with coffee, but with paperwork. By 8 a.m., I was back at my desk in the sheriff's office with a stack of folders tall enough to qualify as a fire hazard. Complaints from residents, copies of fines, HOA notices, printouts of those vehicle verification fee emails Daniel had dropped off before midnight. Every sheet of paper was another brick in the wall Pine Ridge's leadership had built between themselves and their neighbors. I wasn't alone. The county attorney, a slim, sharp-eyed woman named Karen Wu, sat across from me, flipping through documents like a human scanner. Beside her was Doug, our county commissioner, who had the exhausted patience of a man who'd been listening to HOA drama for far too many years. "This is worse than I thought," Karen said, tapping a page with one finger. "They created an entire parallel structure of fees that never went through official approval." Doug whistled quietly. "Non-compliant vehicle assessment fee, access credential renewal surcharge, community security contribution." He shook his head. "That's 3 different names for the same shakedown. And look at this," I added, sliding another packet toward them. "Residents pay to register their vehicles with the HOA. If they don't, they end up on the blacklist. blacklist crosses with the spike strip logs. If your plate is on that list, your tires get shredded. Karen leaned back, exhaling slowly. That's not just mismanagement. That's organized extortion using a physical hazard on public infrastructure. Felony territory? I asked. Oh, we're way past felony territory, she replied. We're in multiple counts and a very long time to think about your life choices territory. Doug rubbed his forehead. And the funds from all this went where? Exactly. We all looked at the ledger, what passed for a ledger, anyway. The HOA books weren't messy. They were actively evasive. Vague line items, generic labels, lots of administrative and consulting and security upgrades. A few things stood out immediately. Community Safety Initiative, $27, $400, I read aloud. Bet we know what that was. The spike strip, cameras, signage, and Brent's toy badge, Doug muttered. Board strategic session, $8, $900, Karen continued. A retreat, a weekend at a resort outside the county, I confirmed. Mallory posted photos, infinity pool, champagne brunch, leadership development. Doug groaned. All paid out of resident fees. Beautiful. And here, Karen said, pointing to another column, legal advisory reserve, $15, $200. Except I called our contracted counsel this morning. They never received a dime of that. So where did it go? I asked. She smiled thinly. We're going to find out. By mid-morning, we had enough to move forward formally. Karen headed back to her office to draft charges and coordinate with the DA. Doug left to start the county's civil process to freeze the HOA's remaining funds. I stayed behind to do the part of the job I hated the most but respected the most. Interrogation, downstairs. The holding cells were quiet. Brent occupied one, staring at the floor with his fingers laced together. He'd shed the fake HOA police polo and sat in a plain gray t-shirt now, looking far less intimidating and far more like a man who'd finally realized he was not. In fact, bulletproof, Mallory was in the adjacent cell. Arms crossed, chin lifted, still clinging to the scraps of her authority, like a dethroned monarch who hadn't yet accepted exile. I stopped at Brent's door first. He looked up slowly. Sheriff, morning, I said. Sleep well. Not really. Good, I replied. Means your conscience isn't completely dead. He winced, but didn't argue. I dragged a chair over and sat down facing the bars. Here's the situation, Brent. The DA is drawing up charges. They're not small ones. You're looking at obstruction, property damage, fraud, impersonation of an officer, conspiracy. That's the short list. He swallowed. I was following orders. You were enjoying it? I said calmly. You liked having power you weren't supposed to have. He didn't deny it. That was something, at least. So what happens to me? He asked quietly. That depends, I said. Right now, we know what you did. What we don't know is everything Mallory did and who else helped her. He glanced instinctively toward her cell, then back at me. She'll throw you under the bus, I continued. People like her always do. You've seen it. When things go wrong, someone has to be the rogue actor. That's going to be you unless you stop playing shield and start telling the truth. He clenched his jaw, thinking it over. Brent, I said, lowering my voice, you want even a shot at a plea. You cooperate. You tell us about the money, the fake legal opinions, the meetings, the instructions, the way she told you to use that spike strip. His shoulders sagged. She told us the road would be ours soon, he muttered. She said, once the county recognized the HOA's authority over Redwood Loop, we'd be legitimized. She said we had to establish control first, meaning, he said bitterly. We had to show residents it was easier to comply than to fight. Fines didn't scare them enough, so she pushed the vehicle program, then the spike strip. And the money? He let out a hollow laugh. Ask her about the consultant, the one no one's ever met in person. I nodded slowly. We will. This helps you, Brent. Don't forget that. He nodded once, eyes glistening. For the first time, he looked less like the puffed-up enforcer from the street and more like a man who'd finally run headfirst into consequences. I stood and walked a few steps to Mallory's cell. She didn't wait for me to speak. This is absurd, she snapped. You're humiliating me over a misunderstanding. This isn't a misunderstanding, I said. It's a pattern. I was trying to keep this community safe, she insisted. There were speeding complaints, suspicious vehicles. People felt unsafe and demanded action. No, I said, voice even. What they demanded was reasonable rules and transparency. You gave them harassment and fear. She scoffed. They're ungrateful. I increased their property values. I maintained standards. Without me, this place would look like a trailer park. That's what you think of them, I asked. Your neighbors. My residents, she corrected. There's your problem, I said. You never saw them as neighbors, just subjects. She rolled her eyes. Save the moral lecture. I've read the bylaws. I know the authority of a homeowners association, and I've read the state statutes, I replied. I know the limits of that authority. You stepped way over that line. She folded her arms tighter. I'll get a lawyer. You'll need one, I said. Because the DA will be very interested in your consultant fund and why HOA money was being transferred to personal accounts. For the first time, she faltered. I have no idea what you're talking about, she said, but less confidently now. You will? I replied, turning away. And so will a judge. I left her there, still clinging to the idea she could talk her way out of it. The thing about people like Mallory is they truly believe rules apply to everyone but them. Consequences are theoretical until the day they aren't. Over the next week, the dominoes fell fast. The county placed a formal hold on all HOA assets. The bank account was frozen, the books subpoenaed, and a full forensic audit launched. Residents were notified that any prior fines issued in connection with vehicle verification or security enforcement were suspended pending investigation. The DA's office officially charged Mallory and Brent with multiple counts. Brent, true to his word, cooperated, providing emails, text messages, and records of private meetings where Mallory had outlined her plans to control access to Redwood Loop and increase HOA revenue by incentivizing compliance through consequences. That last phrase ended up repeated more than once in court. The spike strip itself became almost infamous, photographed, measured, referenced in legal filings, and ultimately held up as the physical symbol of just how far this HOA had strayed from anything resembling reason. Meanwhile, back in Pine Ridge, life began to adjust. With the HOA dissolved, residents formed a small volunteer committee. Not a power structure, just a group of neighbors willing to coordinate basics. They arranged trash pickup schedules, organized a genuine community barbecue, and started a working group to figure out how to handle shared landscaping without someone threatening fines over flower color. The funniest part? Things didn't fall apart. Lawns stayed mowed. Houses didn't suddenly turn neon purple. No one built a 40-foot statue of a flamingo in their front yard. People, when given trust instead of threats, usually handle themselves just fine. One afternoon, about 3 weeks after the arrests, I drove through Pine Ridge just to see how they were doing. The air felt lighter. Kids played basketball in each other's driveways without anyone marching out with a clipboard. A woman laughed loudly on her porch while repainting her front door, a soft shade of green that would definitely not have been approved before. As I turned the corner near the old checkpoint, I saw a crew from the County Public Works Department resurfacing the spot where the spike strip had been. Fresh asphalt, smooth and dark, erased the scars from the bolts that had once held it down. I slowed the truck, rolled down my window. "How's it look?" I called. One of the workers grinned. "Better without fangs in it, Sheriff?" "Agreed," I said. Later that weekend, I went into town to grab some supplies. As I walked through the local flea market, picking up fresh produce and trying not to buy yet another old pocket knife I didn't need, I heard a voice calling out half-heartedly, "HOA parking permits, $5, collectible, limited edition." I turned. There was Brent, hunched behind a folding table, a cardboard box in front of him, filled with stacks of old Pine Ridge, approved parking hang tags, and a couple of unused HOA security patches. Nobody was buying. People walked past him without a second glance. He noticed me, and for a second, his shoulders tightened in embarrassment. Then he let out a humorless laugh. "Want one?" he asked, holding up a faded blue hang tag. "Souvenir of a very bad idea. I've already got all the reminders I need," I said. He nodded, gaze dropping again. "Yeah, me too. I didn't gloat. I didn't need to. Losing fake power is its own punishment. I thought the Pine Ridge story was finished the day Brent was spotted selling those dusty HOA permits at the flea market. It felt like the final chapter, a man reckoning with the fallout of the authority he never should have had, selling scraps of a failed regime for pocket change. But stories like this rarely end cleanly. Not when there's still paperwork to process, residents to reimburse, and a community learning how to breathe again. And not when Mallory Grant still had one last twist left in her. It started on a Wednesday morning, about 3 weeks after the dissolution vote. I was in my office, flipping through the latest audit findings, when Marlene knocked on my door. "She's asking for you," she said. I didn't have to ask who. Mallory had filed request after request since her arrest, appeals, formal complaints, handwritten letters insisting on her innocence, and even a petition demanding reinstatement of her HOA presidency, as if the residents she terrorized for years were going to rise up and beg for her return. But this was different. This was a direct request for a personal meeting. "Is her attorney with her?" I asked. "No," Marlene said. She waved him. That was unusual, bad for her, but unusual. I set the audit packet aside, grabbed my notebook, and headed downstairs. Mallory sat in the small interview room, hands folded neatly on the table like she was waiting for afternoon tea rather than facing a mountain of felony charges. Her hair was tidy, her blouse pressed. Though her eyes told the real story, they were tired, hollow, frantic in a way she was trying desperately to hide. "Sheriff," she said as I entered. "Thank you for seeing me." "Didn't have much of a choice," I replied. Pulling out the chair across from her, she tried to smile. It didn't reach anywhere near her eyes. "I wanted to clarify a few things," she began. I waited. "I never intended harm," she said. "Everything I did was to protect Pine Ridge. People were out of control. Cars speeding, outsiders coming in, property values threatened." I let her speak. "I had to do something," she insisted. "The spike strip, the vehicle program, they were tools for safety, for order. You have to understand that." I leaned forward slightly. "Help me understand this. Then, why were HOA funds transferred into an account under your maiden name?" For a moment, her composure wavered. "That money," she said slowly, "was a reserve for emergencies. It wasn't labeled that way, administrative shorthand. It wasn't in the HOA's books. Because, she stumbled, clinging to excuses that had already been shredded by evidence. "What about the consultant?" I asked. "The one Brent mentioned, the one you paid over $15,000 for advisory services that no one can verify." Her throat bobbed as she swallowed. That was complicated." "It's simple," I said. "You stole from your neighbors." She slammed her palm on the table. "I built that community." Her voice cracked, echoing off the metal walls. For a moment, she wasn't the perfectly composed HOA president or the tyrant with a clipboard. She was just a woman watching her empire collapse and desperately trying to gather the pieces. "I gave them structure," she whispered, "standards, and they repaid me with betrayal. They repaid you with the truth," I said. She looked up at me through red-rimmed eyes, and the anger in her gaze dissolved into something else, confusion, maybe even disbelief. "How did it come to this?" she murmured. "You forgot they were your neighbors," I said softly, "not your subordinates." She buried her face in her hands. For the first time, I saw genuine regret, but it wasn't for what she'd done. It was for being caught. She never admitted guilt, not directly. But in the end, she gave us one final piece of information. Confirmation of additional transfers she made to a second private account. Another nail in the coffin. By the time I left the room, I knew her story was over. The law would take it from here. Spring arrived early in Redwood County that year. The air warmed, trees budded, and the tension that had hung over Pine Ridge like a storm cloud finally began to lift. With the HOA gone, the residents found themselves rediscovering the kind of community that didn't need fines or fear to hold itself together. One Saturday afternoon, I drove through Pine Ridge again, not as a sheriff on duty, just as a neighbor passing by. Kids raced bicycles down the sidewalk. Someone grilled hamburgers in their backyard. A couple pushed a stroller while walking their dog. The atmosphere that once felt stiff and patrolled now felt alive. When people didn't need permission to live, they lived. I slowed as I reached the old HOA office. The sign had been removed. The windows were open. Inside, I saw folding tables set up for what looked like a neighborhood planning meeting. Residents sitting together, discussing landscaping and events with genuine smiles instead of forced compliance. Eddie spotted me from the door and waved. "Get over here, Will." I parked and walked over. Inside, he handed me a cold soda and pointed to a freshly sketched map on the table. "We're redesigning the entrance, thinking flowers. Maybe a small sign, something warm, something that says, "Welcome." Sounds like a good start, I said. And Eddie grinned. We've been thinking of naming the road, I groaned. Eddie. Listen, he said, clapping a hand on my shoulder. You saved our sorry hides. You tore down the spike strip. You shut down the dictatorship. You gave us our neighborhood back. You all did the real work, I argued. You stood up? Sure, he said. But every rebellion needs a sheriff. I shook my head, smiling despite myself. So what's the name? Eddie pointed proudly at the paper. Stockton Way. I stared at it for a moment. A soft, quiet tug pulled at something in my chest. I don't need my name on a road, I said. Maybe not, Eddie replied. But we're damn well putting it there anyway. The room broke into laughter. I didn't argue. Sometimes the best thing you can do for a community is show them they can stand on their own. Sometimes the best thing they can do in return is remember the role you played in helping them get there. Before I left, the new volunteer committee had already voted. The sign was approved. And for the first time, I didn't mind being overruled. A month later, everything had settled. Charges were filed, funds were redistributed, residents were reimbursed, Pine Ridge was thriving. And one Saturday morning, as I drove down Redwood Loop, I saw a brand new sign at the entrance. Sheriff's Territory. No HOA control. It wasn't official. It wasn't county issued. It didn't need to be. It was a reminder, a promise, a warning to any future would-be tyrants. This community knows its worth now, and they won't be pushed around again. In the end, Pine Ridge Estates didn't just lose a corrupt HOA. They gained something far more powerful, the understanding that a community is strongest when people look out for each other, not when they're controlled by fear or fines. Rules matter, yes. Order matters, yes. But power without accountability twists into something ugly, and silence in the face of small injustices eventually becomes acceptance of bigger ones. The residents learn to speak up, to question authority, to defend their neighbors instead of hiding behind closed blinds. I learned something too, that sometimes the bravest thing ordinary people can do is simply say, enough. So, tell me, what did this story remind you of? Have you ever faced a situation where someone abused their authority? Comment below, share your experience, and if you enjoy stories where justice finally gets the last word, don't forget to subscribe for more.